Lisa, thanks for hello, and thank you, Lisa. Yeah, thank you for adding that last bit of information. Um, we'll definitely get to any questions you may have at the end of the program. If there's some questions that we are unable to answer right now, then we will definitely research those for you, and get back to you. Again, so this is an overview of the Financial Hardship Program. It won't be We're trying to hit the highlights of what you need, some of the basic information that you need. And if you need any more in-depth, you can always contact us and we can walk you through um, any part of the financial hardship review process. Okay, so some of the topics we're going to cover today. The first thing up front being the purpose of the financial hardship, the process and requirements for determining a district's eligibility for financial hardship status, the process for determining the district's available contribution that they can contribute towards their SFP projects, and then how project savings or overspent are disposed, or how you pay back that savings or how you apply that savings to a future project, and the same thing with the overspent. And then any potential problems and how to avoid those problems, because like we said earlier, we want to make sure this is as smooth a process as possible for the district, and so we can hit some potential problem areas as well. Okay, the purpose of financial hardship. Financial hardship is to assist districts and COEs that could not provide their matching share on their school facility program projects. And hardship is only for new construction, modernization, and facility hardship projects. And you can see from the chart there that the basic new construction project is a 50-50 project with 50% state share and 50% district share or their cash contribution, which would add up to the total project funding. And the example is the $1 million. On the right, you have financial hardship and how that potentially the funding could be shaped up. So it's still 50-50. You have 50% for the state share that you see there, the $500,000. But the district share can be made up of a combination of financial hardship apportionment and the district's cash contribution up to 100% potentially of financial hardship apportionment. In this example, we had the $400,000 for the hardship apportionment, the cash contribution of $100,000 made up the $500,000 for the district share, and that gets your total project funding of $1 million. So that's just the basic difference. And it's the same thing for the modernization, other than with the mod, it's the basic 60-40, and that 40% potentially could be made up by the financial hardship share as well. The basic review process. When the district first submits their application for funding for their SAB 5004, if they want to request financial hardship assistance, then there's a box on the form on the 5004 that you will check requesting that financial hardship assistance. The OPC will notify the district in writing approximately about 90 days prior to the application process, or about 6 months before the project goes to the board, requesting the documentation that's needed for that hardship review. The district will then submit a phase 1 and a phase 2 checklist, project worksheets, fund worksheets, and all other supporting documentation within the 60 days after notification from OPSC. The financial hardship approval and funding application is currently processed concurrently. If some of you have been in the program prior to there being PIF rounds or the priority and funding rounds, hardship was the first thing you would do in the process. You would get your financial hardship approval first. Once you had that approval letter, then you would submit in your 5004. But since we switched over to that priority and funding rounds and that process, we do the hardship approval and the funding application. They're processed concurrently on 2 separate tracks at the same time. Then from there, once the review is complete, a findings letter will be issued to the district. And then once the district concurs with our findings and sends back that concurrence by signing off on the fund worksheets, then an approval letter will be issued to the district. And that approval letter will be good for 6 months of hardship status. Okay, and here's kind of the timeline. It's just showing in graph form basically the same thing I was talking about. You can see on the far left, the first thing is that funding application is submitted, and that's where the district would check the box stating that they were requesting financial hardship status. And then the hardship team will time so we can try to get it where we receive the documents 90 days before the expected board date. We'll send out the requesting the documentation for the phase 1 and the phase 2 checklist. After the review is complete, then the findings letter is sent to the district. And then again, once that district concurs with the findings by signing off on those fund worksheets, and then the approval letter is sent. And then you can see on the far right in the yellow on the timeline, then the SAB item is placed on the unfunded list, and then the district will enter the next available certification round, or the priority in funding round. They'll certify, and then once they've been certified, then the funds will be released to the district. So it's just a basic timeline to give you a quick overview of how that process happens. Okay, so the financial hardship review, we've already mentioned that there's two checklists. There's a phase 1 and a phase 2 checklist. So the review consists of two phases. The first one, phase 1, sometimes we refer to that phase 1 as the light switch test. Does the district meet one of the main four criteria to establish eligibility for financial hardship status? If you're a COE, you automatically meet that phase 1. You still submit the checklist, and then you will also submit the phase 2 checklist, which helps us determine the amount of district funds that are available for contribution. You can see there's a link for both forms. It's on the OPSC website under the Forms tab. You can get both the phase 1 checklist and the phase 2 checklist. And when we're talking about the phase 2, that's all your documentation for your available funds. That's when they review your audited financial statements, any general bond obligations, booklets that you have, any certificates of participation, basically any of your available capital project funds. And then those available funds are made of two components: the available funds that we find in those capital project funds, and then any contribution due to expenditure district may have. And the contribution due to expenditures is just basically expenditures that the district had on a project before they submitted for their financial hardship application. And we'll go in a little bit more about what that contribution means in some later slides. Okay, so the first thing is establishing that phase 1 eligibility. And there's two parts to that. A district must be leveling the maximum developer fee justified under law, and they must meet one of the following criteria. Do they have long-term debt of 60% or more of their total bonding capacity? Have they had a successful vote or bond election within the past 2 years? Is it a county office of education? Is it a smaller district and their total bonding capacity is less than 5 million? If they don't meet one of those four, the district still has the option to apply for hardship under other evidence. And it's basically other evidence of reasonable effort that eventually would have to be approved by the state allocation board. So it's basically like an appeal. A district submits their evidence of why they qualify for hardship, and then the item is taken to the state allocation board for approval. Okay, here's one example of one of the ways that a district can qualify for financial hardship status and how we calculate that. So this one has to do with bonding capacity. So for bonding capacity, we need to have the district's total assessed evaluation. The most recent one, usually those assessed evaluations are released in August, and we just need the most recent one. We take that assessed evaluation, times it by 2.5% for unified districts, or 1.25% for all other districts, to come up with a district's total bonding capacity. So we have an example down below. For this one, the district had a total assessed evaluation of 100 million. So then for the unified district, we would times it by the 2.5% to come up with a 2.5 million in total bonding capacity. For the non-unified districts, again, it's that 1.25%. We times it by the 100 million, and that comes up to a 1.25 million total bonding capacity. So for this example, they were both smaller districts, and they qualified under that criteria of having a total bonding capacity of less than 5 million. But that's just one example of how we calculate and verify that the district does qualify for one of those qualifying criteria. Okay, so if they do meet that light switch test, the phase 1 light switch test, then we move on to the determination in the phase 2. And this phase 2 is where we're reviewing the district's capital facility funds to determine the amount of funding that they have available to contribute toward their SFP projects. Those capital facility funds are funds 21 through 50, and we review the revenues and expenditures for up to the past 3 years. And those revenues are presented in the district's fund worksheets they submit. For example, if you had bond funds in Fund 21, you'd submit a fund worksheet for Fund 21. If you're collecting developer fees, then you submit a fund worksheet for Fund 25 showing those developer fees. If you had previous SFP projects and you have funding from the state, that's usually sitting in Fund 35, so you'd submit that fund worksheet showing those funds that you have in Fund 35. We review the transfers in and out of those capital facility funds. We may examine special reserve funds for availability, and the available funds may be reduced by any eligible encumbrances. And then also certificates of participation are available funds unless they're issued for the purpose of bridge financing. And we'll get into what exactly that bridge financing means for those that haven't gone through that process before. Okay, so that funding. So if we determine that the available funds are less than the district match on the projects that they are coming in for, basically the state will fund the difference between the district match and the amount of funding that we found available. So if you have a $10 million project, the district share was going to be, or their match requirement was going to be $5 million, and the district had 200,000 available, so then they'd qualify for the 4.8 million in financial hardship assistance, and then they would contribute the 200,000 that we found available in the review, and that's in addition to the other 5 million from the state share. The qualifying COE and districts may request site and or design funding prior to requesting the full funding if they're eligible for financial hardship, and available funds again are less than that site or design grant. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the financial hardship approval is valid for 6 months from the date that the approval letter is issued. So if you have any other projects on the funded list that are on the workload list, I should say, that are scheduled to go forward to a future board in those 6 months, then another hardship review will not have to be done. But if another project comes down the line from the workload list after that 6 months expires, then you will have to renew your financial hardship status at that point. Okay, we talked about bridge financing. So bridge financing is a mean for a district to borrow funds, and it could be either borrow funds for temporary financing, such as using a certificate of participation, issuing that to temporarily move the project forward until state funding becomes available. Or you can also interfund borrow too as well. We have an official policy that was approved by the state allocation board, and it's the bridge financing / interfund borrowing policy letter that was approved by the state allocation board. OPSC encourages districts to request the approval for bridge financing in advance of submitting your hardship package, or at least in advance of issuing that debt instrument. And the district must also recognize that there's an element of risk, meaning that if you're sitting on the unfunded list waiting for future funding, that there is no guarantee of that funding, and the district recognizes that as they move forward with their own financing to move the project forward. And one of the things that we do require, if you would, is to have a board resolution that indicates some of the following. It identifies the source of funds. Are you going to use a COP? Is it going to be interfund borrowing? What is that source of funds using that you're going to use to move that project forward? Identify the use of the funds. So identify the specific projects that you're using the funding for, and identify the specific amount of funding that will be used. Because if you issue any funding beyond what's needed, if you have a project again sitting there for $10 million on the unfunded list, but you issue a COP for $11 million, then potentially that amount past the 10 million, or that other $1 million, potentially could be available as available funds in another financial hardship review. So that's why we want that resolution to identify the specific amount of funds that you're going to use. And most important too is a statement that the funds being borrowed will be repaid within 60 days of receipt of the first dollar of state funding. So once that apportionment is received, or the fund release is received by the district, then a 60-day clock starts in order to retire that debt instrument that was used to bridge the project or move the project forward. And then again, the statement that the board recognizes that state funds may not be received, and then it moves forward doing so at its own risk. And so we have here is an example of a board resolution, and you can always contact our office to get a copy of this template. We've released it in the past. I sent it out to a district just last week, just to show them some of those things that we need. And it's just some of the things that we mentioned on the previous slide. Um, the district that is applying for financial hardship funding from OPSC, and then some of the main things you see in those sections 1 through 6 covering what needs to be in there. In section 2, it's talking about the specific amount of funds, the project that needs to be in there. In section 3, it's talking about that the board recognizes that there's no guarantee of state funding for this project and proceeds at their own risk. So yeah, some of that basic information, and then that the funds shall be repaid within 60 days after receipt of state funding for the project. So this is the basic template. If anyone, again, needs a copy of that, that we can definitely just contact us and we can send it to them. But as long as your resolution has some of that basic information that's needed, then it should be fine. And we can always review it ahead of time too. We've had multiple districts do that. Request for us to review the board resolution ahead of time just to make sure that they had everything on there that's needed. And we'll be more than happy to review that for you and get back to you. And it's much easier to work out anything ahead of time before it actually goes to your school board. And then just make sure again, that everything's on there and that everything moves forward as smoothly as possible for the district. Okay, project savings. If your financial hardship, if closeout determines that a financial project has savings, then there's 2 options of how you treat that savings. The savings may be retained for a period up to 3 years to offset the financial hardship apportionment of a future project that comes along within that 3-year period, or the savings can be repaid to the state when the project that generated the savings is closed out. For the first option, if the district thinks they're going to have a project within those 3 years, but then a project doesn't materialize, it doesn't move forward for whatever reason, that's fine. Just at the end of the 3 years, then you'll be notified that you need to return that savings plus any interest that was generated during that 3 years. So after the 3 years, then the funding will be returned to the state at that point. Okay, so here's a basic timeline for a district that decided to retain savings to apply to a future hardship. There's 2 of them. The top timeline is for an elementary school project, the bottom for a middle or high school. The difference just being the 3 years in order for a project to be considered complete for an elementary, and the 4 years for a middle or high school. So in this example, the project got its funding on 1/24/15 of the $5 million. And so after that 3-year period, on January 24th of 2018, the project was complete. They submitted their final 100% expenditure report to the state, and they reported a cost of $1 million. So they had that savings of $1 million. The audit on that project, once that 100% expenditure report is received, has to be complete within 1 year. So on 1/24/19, the audit is complete, and the auditors confirmed that the reported savings of $1 million was the correct amount. It was verified, and so then the district elects at that point to retain the savings. And so then they have that up to that 3-year period that I mentioned earlier to apply that savings to another project. And then that's up to that 1/24/22. If that savings wasn't used and applied to another project before that January 24th of 22, then the district would be notified that they need to return that $1 million in savings plus any interest that was generated during that 3-year period. And it's the same thing down below for the middle or high school, but that is just a 4-year period until the project is complete. Okay, so that was savings, but what about if a financial hardship district is overspent? Just have a quick example. This is a $5 million project of new construction, 2.5 for the state apportionment, 2.5 for the financial hardship apportionment. And they had audited expenditures determined by the local auditor of $6 million. And so they were overspent by $1 million. If a financial hardship is overspent, they do have 2 options. They can retain that funding that was overspent to use it to offset the financial hardship apportionment of a future hardship project within the next 3 years, or they agree to remain out of the financial hardship program for 3 years from the date of the last school facility program grant for hardship that was received. And with the first one, Again, if the 3 years elapsed and another hardship project had not come along, then it's the same thing as remaining out of the program for 3 years. So then those funds do not have to be returned to the state at that point. And then, so basically here's that overspent example for a middle or high school project. They received the $5 million in 2015. In 2019, they submitted that final expenditure report with the $6 million in expenditures. The audit was complete a year later, and the audit confirmed that they did have $1 million overspent. And so then the district again has that option to retain it, that overspent amount for 3 years, or to stay out of the program for 3 years. The deadline would be the 3 years later on January 24th of 2023 to offset that project. If the district has no projects to offset before that time, then they stayed out of the required 3 years, and then no funds are due to the state. And it's 3 years, not from when that project was closed, but 3 years, or excuse me, yes, it is 3 years from when that project was closed. For the hardship savings on the previous one, it's 3 years from the most recent hardship apportionment. Okay, and then here's the basic timeline. Again, where the overspent is retained, there's that high school. Using those same dates, the January 2015, the project was complete in January of 2019, and then the audit did determine that they had $1 million in overspent. And then in blue there, you'll see that 3-year period that the district has to stay out of the program. And if they do stay out of that program, even though they chose to retain the money to offset a future hardship project, then they basically met their 3 years. They stayed out of that program for 3 years, so then those funds do not have to be returned to the state. And when that final closeout letter gets sent to the district, notifying them that the project is closed and they have overspent, that's when the district will indicate if they want to hold on to the overspent amount for the 3-year period, or they were going to stay out of the program for 3 years. But after that 3-year period, then they've in essence stayed out, and then again, those funds do not have to be paid back to the state. Okay, some potential problem areas can deal with the developer fee resolution, any unsold bonds, if the district has any bonds that they've issued within a period of time, potential encumbrances where their district may have issued or indicated encumbrances for some that were not eligible, and again, that contribution due to expenditure. And we'll go through each one of those to kind of give you a better idea of what we're talking about. So the first one being the developer fee. A district must have a current resolution setting the developer fee at the maximum allowable amount under law. And when we're talking about developer fees, there's 3 levels. The most common being the level 1 developer fee. This fee is set by the state allocation board in January of every even year, and the district must have a current justification study in place. The current rates that were established in 2020 are $4.08 per square foot for residential construction projects and 66 cents per square foot for commercial construction projects. If some districts may have a level 2 fee, there you have to have a needs analysis study to justify the higher level of fees. So based on that needs analysis, it may come back, for example, that the district, the current level for residential is $4.08, but the district has a need of $5.25 per square foot for residential construction projects. So therefore, they would be eligible based on that needs analysis. And also that needs analysis, it would show there's 4 criteria in the law, in Ed Code 65995.5 that a district has to satisfy. And those needs analysis studies all mention which 2 of the 4 that the district meets in order to justify the higher fees, in order to be eligible to charge those fees. And then there's level 3 fees, and these are set only when the state allocation board officially notifies the assembly in writing that there are no state funds available, and that at that point the level 3 fees are meant to cover both the state share and the district share of your construction projects. A district may provide documentation showing that a developer fee cannot be levied. This might be one. In the past, we've had an example of a smaller district where they submitted documentation from their legal counsel and also from the county county from the county office, showing that there had not been any development within the district for a certain amount of years. I believe it was for either the past 3 to 5 years. There had been no development, and that they would not be justified in any justification study to show or to levy these fees when there was nothing that could be collected, and there wasn't enough even to cover the cost for the justification study. So those are looked at on a case-by-case basis, but you can potentially submit documentation showing that a developer fee cannot be levied. If you want to get some further information on the developer fees, again, you can look on the OPSC website under resources. There you can find the annual adjustment for the grants and also the developer fee history and what the current level 1 developer fees are that the district should be charging if they have their justification study in place. So that link will take you to that, but you can also go just straight to the OPSC website and look under that resource tab as well. Okay, unsold bonds. Bonds that are authorized but unsold may potentially be counted as district funds available to contribute to the district's matching share for a project. Some potential exceptions for counting these unsold bond is there could be restricted bond language where those bonds are restricted for specific projects, and if the hardship projects they're coming in for are not one of those specific projects, then those bond funds will not be counted as available funds. And also with the Prop 39 bonds, if the district is at the taxation limits or the sale will exceed the taxation limits, then those funds cannot be counted as available too. And those Prop 39 bonds, they have in the law there's restrictions. It's the sale of the bonds cannot cause the tax to go over $30 for every $100,000 of assessed evaluation for non-unified districts, and then that tax limit is $60 for every $100,000 of assessed evaluation for unified districts. So if selling the unsold portion will exceed that tax limit, or you're already at the tax limit, then those funds will not be counted as available funds. So just for example, in 2016, the district passed a $20 million bond, and then prior to going through the financial hardship application process, the district had sold $15 million of those $20 million, with $5 million remaining as potentially available for contribution. And then, but there are exceptions, like we said, that bond language may exclude the current project that they're coming in for, because it may list these 2 or 3 specific projects, and the current hardship project you're seeking assistance for is not one of those 3 specific projects. Or the district is already at the tax limit that I mentioned earlier. Again, it's the debt limit of the tax cannot go over that $30 per 100,000 of assessed evaluation for non-unified districts, or for the unified district, it cannot cause the tax to go over $60 for every 100,000 of assessed evaluation. So if the district's already at that limit, or the sale or the partial sale of that remaining $5 million will cause it to go over that tax limit, then those funds would not be considered available. And again, if there's any questions, we can help the district walk through that and determine what that tax limit is, and if whether or not those remaining funds will be considered available funds or not. Okay, encumbrances. This is a big one that we deal with in a lot of the financial hardship reviews. Encumbrances can potentially reduce the amount of funds that are found available for the district's matching share on their SFP projects. Those encumbrances should be listed on your fund worksheets. So if you're submitting a fund worksheet, Fund 21, for example, for your bond funds, and there's some construction contracts that you already have for those, for a project that's you're using those bond funds for, then those encumbrances should be listed along with the backup. They must be for a capital facility project other than the projects for which financial hardship is being requested. And that bullet just basically means that you cannot request an encumbrance for a project that you'll be receiving SFP funding for. The encumbrance must be supported by a contract or legal commitment of funds, and only for the amount remaining on the contract. It can also be for debt service, but if it is for a debt service, then the encumbrance can only be for 1 year of the debt service from the date of application, and the debt service must be paid from the fund for which the encumbrance is being requested. Okay, a couple quick examples of eligible and ineligible encumbrances. And eligible encumbrance can include a construction contract for a project other than the project on the financial hardship application. It can be for a debt service payment for prior borrowing if paid from the fund, and again, only 1 year of the debt service is eligible. Some couple of ineligible examples could be a contract for non-facility items such as cleaning supplies or anything that would be considered administrative in nature, or a construction contract for a project that's on the financial hardship application. Because again, you cannot encumber anything for the project for which you're seeking state funding from. And okay, and the last one then being the contribution due to expenditure. And these are expenditures made on the project on the project where you're coming in for financial hardship status, and these were made on the project prior to the date of the financial hardship application. This contribution to expenditure we count as part of the district's available funds, and this reduces the amount of financial hardship apportionment by the amount that was spent prior to the financial hardship application. And then these and all project expenditures as part of the package when you submit your requested documentation, and as part of the phase 2 checklist is we're asking for the district to report any expenditures made to date on the projects, and any expenditures should be listed on that detailed listing of project expenditures. And you may hear someone at OPSC referring to that detailed listing as the DLO, but that's where your project expenditures should be listed. But if the district expended funds prior to financial hardship approval, they may not be counted as available. They may be exempt as contribution if the district requested bridge financing ahead of time, and those expenditures were made with the bridge financing funds, either from whatever funding the district temporarily borrowed or from any interfund borrowing. And it was made after the district adopted a bridge financing resolution, then those expenditures will not be counted. So that's one of the things that we look at when we're doing the review. We'll check on all the expenditures made prior to the hardship application. If there are expenditures prior to, we check to see if the district had requested any bridge financing in the past. If not, then potentially those expenditures become contribution due to expenditure, which then will be part of the available funds that reduces the financial hardship apportionment that is received on the project. Okay, here we have a pie chart that gives you some of the basic information of the financial hardship dollars that were apportioned in 2020. And it's broken up by facility hardship projects and non-facility hardship projects. These are all financial hardship projects. So you can see that in 2020, there was 79.4 million in total apportionments, and those covered 41 districts. Of those, in the blue there was 37.2 million that was apportioned for facility hardship projects, which covered 9 districts, and there was 42.2 million that was apportioned for the non-facility hardship financial hardship projects, which covered the 33 districts. In the second pie chart here, this breaks up those non-facility hardship projects by district size. So again, you see that total apportionment was 42.2 million, covering the 33 projects. You can see the biggest chunk in blue there, it was for small school districts. There was 28.2 million apportioned, covering 24 districts. The medium-sized districts, it was 9.2 million that was apportioned for 8 districts, and there was 1 district that was considered large, and they had 4.8 million that was apportioned. So it just gives you kind of an idea of how the breakout comes and the size of the districts, and who has been coming in for financial hardship assistance. Okay, resources. The OPSC website is definitely a great resource for a lot of this information that I've talked about, for a lot of the forms that you need, for various forms and links. That's available on the website under the Services tab. If you want to look at the School Facility Handbook, Section 10, that Section 10 covers the Financial Hardship Program and the review process. That's located on the OPSC website under the Resources tab. These are all links that should take you there, but it is on the website under the various tabs. Under forms, you can get such things as the Phase 1 and Phase 2 checklists. the project worksheets that you need to submit, one for each project, the fund worksheet where you need to submit a fund worksheet for each fund that you have funding in those capital project funds, a Fund 21 worksheet for bond funds, a Fund 25 worksheet for your developer fees. If you have SFP funding, you should have a Fund 35 worksheet, or if you have just capital facility funds in your kind of other funds, that's your Fund 40, you should be submitting a fund worksheet for Fund 40. Those worksheets and all the other documents can be found on the OPSC website under forms. Again, that's a link to take you to it, but also if you go into the forms tab, you can find those as well. Okay, points of contact. Again, right now, you can contact me. And then also there you see Michael Luck and Sherry Johnson, the staff that works on the financial hardship reviews. You can contact any of us for any questions ahead of time or during the review process, or if you just have any questions in general, we can work through those with you, walk you through some of the things that you saw today in more detail. We're always happy to spend whatever amount of time we need to make sure the district has a proper understanding, and like Lisa said from the beginning, just to make sure that the process goes as smoothly as possible. And the goal is to get the district through, to get their funding that they qualify for in a timely process. Okay, one way to get some basic information, we have email blasts that go out to the district. So to receive the latest news from OPSC, you can subscribe there, and the link is right there at the top. If you do subscribe, you can get notifications on all SAB and OPSC meeting notices. You can get the SAB agendas before any of the meetings. There you can get all the priority and funding round announcements and any other SAB or OPSC information by signing up there. Okay, and now we can open up to any questions you may have.